Okay, this video is going to be a way to get you started for the animation on your final project. If you choose option 2, you can do an animation or a physics engine. Right now we're going to work on the animation, and the next video will be physics engine. Okay, so we're starting out with an HTML canvas. Okay, so I've created a file called animation. And this file, when I get done, will be available on the CS15100 account under the directory final project. Okay, so create our basic HTML document, make a title. Now we need a canvas element. We need an ID so we can get it with document.getElement by ID. And I'm going to say the ID is my canvas. Okay, we need to set the height and width. Uh, 640 pixels by 480 is a decent way to start. You can change that if you want. And then display something if the canvas isn't supported by the browser. Okay, so there's our canvas element, and then we're going to need a button. So we're going to make a BR tag and put a button underneath. So we've got a button here, and the important bit is on click. That's how we access our JavaScript. On click. And so I'm going to make this button say start. This is the text on the button. And on click, we're going to run a function called start animation. Okay, now I haven't made this function yet, so that's the next step. So I'm going to put a script tag at the bottom of my body element. Okay. And this is, I'm just going to manually type in JavaScript here. I'm not importing a file. Now you could import a file if you wanted. Okay, so, and I'm pushing the indentation back to the beginning because we're going to do a lot of JavaScript which has its own indentation. Alright, so I kind of like to visually separate this a little bit so I know this is JavaScript. Okay, so first we're going to get the canvas element. Document.getElement by ID. The ID I used is up here. It's my canvas. My canvas. Okay, then I'm going to create the canvas context. Or get it rather. So CTX is the variable I'm naming the canvas context, and that's how you draw everything. So CTX equals the canvas element dot get context, and we want a 2D context. We're drawing in 2 dimensions. Okay. So let's start out. We're going to make an animation, so we're going to have a background of some sort. Okay, so function draw background. Okay, and I'm going to introduce a new topic here, context.save and context.restore. This basically saves any settings that you have. So if you've changed the fill style or the stroke style or anything like that, it saves it, and then you can do a function that changes all that and then restore it real quick without having to manually restore it. Okay. So at the beginning and end of most of these functions, I'm going to do context.save and context.restore. And that just makes drawing a little bit easier, so I don't always have to reset all of my my context settings. Okay, so I'm going to draw this background. To start out, I'm just going to make a gray background so we can make sure it's working. Okay, so draw background. Let's see, context dot fill style equals, and we'll just make it a gray, and then context dot fill rect. I'm going to start at the X position 0, which is the top left corner, Y position 0. Well, the X position is the left, which is 0. Y position, the top is 0. And then the second X position is the end of the canvas, which we know the canvas is 640 by 480, so this is 640. And then the second Y position, Y2, is 480. And it's important to think about this concept where you have a left side of an object and a right side of an object, and a top and a bottom of an object, and there's also a center. The center of the object is going to be, like the center of the canvas, is halfway between x1 and x2. So the center would be 320. The center of the Y value of the canvas would be halfway between y1 and y2. So the center of the canvas in the Y position is 240. Okay. So this is going to draw the background. And let's go ahead and do a console.log. Drawing background. Okay. There we go. So there's gray. So it's working. Drawing background. So now I want it to happen when I hit start is I'm going to draw frames one at a time. I'm going to begin the animation, and I have to draw the different frames of the animation. So generally what this means is you draw a background for the actors in your animation to live on. Okay? Every time I draw the background, it wipes out the previous frame. Okay? So I'm going to make a mechanism that allows me every 150 milliseconds it's going to draw a new frame. Alright? So first let's start out and make our start animation function. And add a little console.log. Starting animation. Okay, refresh, we see starting animation, that's working. Okay. Now let's make our background a little bit more interesting. Let's do a sky, some grass, and like a sun in the background. Alright, so every time we draw a frame, this background is going to be drawn. Excuse me. So every time each frame, the background is drawn and it wipes away the old frame, essentially. Okay, so whatever's on the canvas gets replaced by this background. So to draw the sky, we'll do a light blue. So a little bit of red, a little bit of green, and a lot of blue. Okay, and let's make this, it's going to be the top half of the screen. So it's going to go from X1 to X2 is going to be the entire width of the canvas, but this is only going to be halfway. It's going to be the top of the canvas to half of this. So 240. Okay, so now we'll make the grass. And we'll make this a green. We'll say this is a little bit of red, a lot of green, and a little bit of blue. And then we're going to do ctx dot fill rect. Now this is going to be the opposite square. So again, the x value is the width of the entire canvas. So we're going to start at x0. Our y0 is halfway down the canvas, right? So we want, for the sky, we went 0 to 240, and for the grass, we were going to go 240 to 480. So the y value here is 240, and then the x, we're going all the way across the canvas, so that's 640, and then 480, we're going all the way to the bottom of the canvas. Okay, this is the grass. And then we're going to make a sun. So we do context dot begin path, context dot arc. So the arc, you have an x and a y for the center of the arc. So this is 640 by 480, so we want maybe around 500 for the center x, and then the y is about 100-ish. Okay, so we'll do 500 and 100, and then the radius, we'll say we want 75. So that means the diameter is going to be about 150 wide. That's about what we want. That's a nice big sun. Okay, then this next parameter is where we start drawing on the circle. We're creating a path here, so it's 0, and we want to go to math.pi times 2. Okay, then we do context.close path, and then context.fill. Except we need a fill style. So context.fill style, we want this to be a nice yellow. So we'll say a lot of red, a lot of green, and a little bit of blue, but not very much. The blue is just going to lighten it up a little bit. Okay. Oh, I forgot my hash. There we go. Okay, so when I reload this, we've got sky and the grass. I've got an extra E here on begin path. And we've got a capital A. Alright. So there's our background, and that's going to get drawn every every single frame. That's the first thing that's drawn, and then you draw your actors on top of that. Okay, so I'm going to make the mechanism to start the animation. I need some variables to start with. Okay, so I'm going to have var has started. That's going to start out as false, and when I click the start button, it will start. Okay, I'm going to have an array of frames, and these frames, it's going to be an array of functions, and I'll just call each function in the array. So it'll be function do something, and then the second item in the array will be a function that does something and draws the actors in a slightly different position. And then the third frame will be a function that draws the actors in a slightly different position as the last one, right? So you're going to have frames here, and you're going to have what did I say, 20 or 30 of them, I forget exactly. So look on the lab for that information. Okay, this is just going to get you started though. Okay, so I have an array of functions that draw each frame. Okay, I also have a frame number, which is what frame we're currently drawing. So it's going to start out on the first frame. You index items in an array starting at 0. So the first frame is 0. And then the last variable we need here is, oops, forgot var. Last variable we need here is a delay. How long do we wait before drawing each frame? The computer's super fast, so if we don't add a delay, it'll just look like it drew the last frame. We won't hardly see anything at all. Okay, so we have to have a frame delay of some kind. And this is going to be in milliseconds. There are 1,000 milliseconds in 1 second. Okay, so we're going to say 150 milliseconds. That's 0.15 seconds. Okay, so we've got our functions here, and we need to make a function to draw the next frame. Okay, so let's make a function called next frame. Oops, what's going on? There we go. Okay, so we draw next frame. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look for in the animation, actually, when we start the animation, we have to check to see if we have started yet. If has started, if not has started, if you have not started, then we're going to say has started equals true, because it starts out false. Not has started, the opposite of false is true, so if we have not started, then we make this true, and we call next frame. Okay, that comes in here. So next frame, what we do is we get one of those functions in our frame array, our frames array. This is an array of functions, and each one's going to draw a frame. So we get our draw frame function, frames, and then the index is going to be whatever index this is. So it starts out at 0, so it's frame number. Okay, now it's possible we've gone all the way through the array and frame number is larger than any index for any of the elements in our array. If that's true, then frame number will be undefined. Okay, so if draw frame equals undefined, then we have no more frames, and we end the animation and reset the variables to be run again. Okay, so the reason we're doing this basically is if you click start a whole bunch of times, you only want it to do something if the animation isn't in progress, because you don't want it to start over in the middle of the animation. Okay, so once we get to the end of the animation, we reset the variables. The variables are has started equals false. So set it back to its default state, and then we go frame number back to 0. Okay, because at this point, at the end of the animation, it will be some number like 31 if there's 30 frames. Okay, so we got to set it back to 0, and then we can press start again, and the animation will start again. Okay, and then we return from the function. So this. If there are no more frames, then we do this and then return. If there is a frame, what we do is we draw a background, because you always draw the background before each frame. Let's do a console.log. And we're going to draw a frame. And then frame num. So we can see in the console, we can see, we'll draw the background, then the frame, and it'll tell us which number, and then the background, and then the frame, and then the background, and then the frame. Okay, so you draw your background, and we have this draw frame, which is the function we got from our frames array. Draw frame. And then we increment our frame number. Okay, and then this is the new bit that you guys aren't probably not familiar with yet. We haven't gone over it. This is a set timeout. What this does is it delays when the function you give it. It takes two parameters. You give it a function and then a delay. Okay, what it does is it waits this amount of time in milliseconds, and then it runs this function. Okay, so our function that we want it to run is next frame. This is a recursive function. Next frame, each time you call it, it increments the frame number. Okay, so if we just keep calling next frame over and over and over again, it will animate. But we want a little bit of time in between each frame animation. So this delay is going to be this variable here. Okay, and the reason this is in all caps is in JavaScript there's a convention where this is a constant value. We're never supposed to change that, and you tell the coder not to change this value ever by making it all caps. If the coder changes this value within the program, then they're doing something wrong. Now, if at the beginning of the program you want to change it, you should only ever set it once. So that's what the constant value means. Now we can mess with this value and change the speed of our animation, but within the program, after we've declared this one time, we never change it. That's what it means to be a constant. And you usually do all caps with that and separate the words by underscores. Okay, so we've got our set timeout and our frame delay, and the function we want is next frame. Okay. Okay, so this is basically all you need to get started, and then all you have to do is add functions to your frames array. So to add something to a frame, to an array, you use the .push function. And what are we adding? We're adding a function to draw some stuff. Okay, so context.save. Context.restore. And then we do context.fill style equals red. context dot fill rect. We'll say started at 10, 10, 200, 100, and that's it. So this is we're just drawing one actor right now. It's just a box, okay? And then we're going to make a second frame, and the box is going to move slightly. So we can move it in the X position by 5 and in the Y position by 5. Okay, and then let's go ahead and we'll change the height of it too. We'll say it's 110. Okay, and then I can copy this, and we'll copy both of these. Let's see, and that gives us, we'll say this is, we're going to go 10, 15, 20, and then add another 10 here. So it goes from 110 to 120, and then 25, and this is going to be 130. Okay, so we refresh and we start, and we see we moved 3 frames. We've got this block that's animating 3 frames, or 4 frames. Okay, and so you can keep doing this. So this is going to be 30, 35, 40, 45, and then this goes from 130 to 140, 150, 160, 170. Okay, so we have an animation. It's starting to move. Okay, the speed of the animation again comes from this variable. So I can make this really fast by making it like 50. See, that's much faster. Or I can make it really slow by going 500. And that's a half second between frames. Okay, so 150 is a good kind of middle ground, but you can play with that and make that whatever you want. So if you'll notice, these functions are pretty simple. There's not much in each one. However, we're only doing one thing. In the assignment, you need to have 5 actors, and what that means is just 5 things that animate. You know, if you have an eyeball that winks a few times, that's one actor. If you have an arm that moves up and down, that's an actor. If you have, you know, whatever it is, it has to animate, and you have to have 5 things that basically change. Okay. So this gets pretty complicated because you're going to have like 30 of those. So we can simplify this. We can make a function to help us draw. Okay, so let's say I wanted to make a Mr. Block character that's just a red square. We'll make all of these 200 by 200. So we won't be changing the size anymore. Okay, so we might want to like draw a face and some eyes and stuff on them. Okay, so let's get rid of all these frames because we're going to make this simpler. All right, so we're going to make a function that's draw Mr. Block. Okay, we're going to do our context.save, and at the bottom context.restore. Now Mr. Block has we're going to make him have a position, an X and Y position, and it's going to be the center right here. Alright, so we're going to say variable Mr. Block. We're going to make an object, and we're going to give him an X position and we're going to say we'll start them out at 100, 100, and a Y position, so 100, and then a height and width. Height and width will be 200, and we'll just call it W and H, and so that'll be 200. Okay, so we're storing this information in an object, and we're going to periodically change this, but this is what we're going to use to draw Mr. Block. So if we change any information in this, we'll just call Mr. Block and it'll draw him in the right spot. Okay, so first we draw his head. And that's just the red block. Okay, but the X value is going to be Mr. Block dot. Now the X is in the center, so we want for X1 we want Mr. Block dot X minus half of the width. Okay, and then so this is Mr. Block X minus Mr. Block dot width divided by 2. Okay, and then the same way, this is Mr. Block, the Y value is Mr. Block dot Y minus half of the height. So Mr. Block dot Y minus height divided by 2. And then the width and height is Mr. Block dot W and Mr. Block dot height. And so now in here I can just draw Mr. Block. Okay, I started them at 100, 100. Let's move that. Let's make it 150, 150. And let's make them size 100. Mm, 150. There we go. Okay, let's lower him down a little bit so he's on the grass. We'll say 350. It's too much. 250. Okay. So we can go through here, and each frame, I make a new frame. What I can do is I can change Mr. Block's position. I can say Mr. Block dot X equals plus equals, so it equals whatever it did, but I'm just going to add 5 to it. And each time I just change the X position and move Mr. Block. So now start, and Mr. Block is just moving in the X position. And all I did is each time I'm adding 5 to the X, because draw Mr. Block does all the hard work. So you only have to draw him kind of once, but you have to draw him in an abstract way in terms of his X, Y, width, and height. Okay, which means we can draw a face here too. So I can do a draw face. And that's just going to be, we'll say it's 2 circles with white and 2 circles with a little black dot, right, to do the eyes. So we'll draw eyes, and then we'll draw a quick smile. Context dot fill style equals white. Context dot stroke style equals black context begin path. I keep putting an E on that. Context close path, and in between here we're going to draw the arc. Context arc. So the X and Y, we're going to want the X and Y are in the center here. The X is going to be about 1/4 of the way. So 1/4 of the way from the beginning X. So you subtract 1/4 of the width. So this is going to be Mr. Block dot X minus Mr. Block dot width divided by 4. So you subtract 1/4, and so that's going to be the center of the eye. Okay, and then the Y position is about the same thing. We're going to want it right about there. So instead of X and W, we use Y and H. Mr. Block dot Y minus Mr. Block dot H divided by 4. Okay, and then the radius of the circle, we're going to say is, I don't know, 15. And then we're going to start at 0 and go to 2 times math.pi. And then we do context dot fill, context dot stroke. Okay, so now he's got a little eyeball. And you could make another black circle in there if you wanted, for the little, center of the eye. I'm not going to, because this is just a demo. But for this eye, the X is going to be plus 1/4. So here we subtracted 1/4 of the width, and on this side the X is going to add 1/4 of the width. So what's nice is we just copy and pasted what we already have. A lot of this animation stuff is copy and paste. So it's kind of a lot of work to do the first thing, but then you don't have to do that again. You just copy and paste. And so now we do a plus sign here, because we're adding a 1/4 of the width. Okay, now he's got 2 eyes. And now we can do the smile. Context dot copy this. Basically, we're going to go from 0 all around the circle halfway. Okay, so instead of 2 pi, we're just going to pi. Our X value is probably going to be 3/4 of the height. Okay, so the Y value starts in the very center, and so we're going to add a 1/4 of the height. So, and then the X value is just going to be exactly in the middle for the smile. Okay, so the X value is in the middle, and the Y value is a little bit down. So Mr. Block plus 1/4 of the width. Then we're going to say the smile is going to be a radius of 30, and then we're going to stroke it instead of fill it. So stroke, which is basically drawing a line around the outside. Okay, I actually don't want a closed path. I could, but I just wanted a smiley face, so there we go. So that's a little bit too low. We need to move that up, actually. So let's let's move this up, and we'll say add 1/8 of the height instead. There you go. So there's Mr. Block, and we can move him around wherever we want. That's one actor and he's moving. Okay, and if I want, I can change his X and Y value. So I can move him forward by 5 pixels for like 10 frames, and then I can change his Y value. So here I can start changing his Y value instead of his X, or both of them. Okay, so he starts moving this way, then he moves down, right? So this gives you an idea of what you can do. You can have him walk forward, stop, another guy walk up, stop. You can have like a text bubble, them saying stuff. You can do whatever you want. But you need to make your background a little bit more complicated than this. You need to have some trees or something in the background. You can do whatever you want, but make it more interesting than just 3 shapes that I have, because you draw every single time. So if you have a fairly good looking background, it's going to make the whole animation look better. Okay, so this is basically your intro to get started here. The interesting thing here, why this is a final project, is because it allows you to use objects, modify those objects, and reuse code. And you have to draw things in terms of these variables, x, y, width, and height. Okay, so you don't have to do it this way. You can draw each frame by itself, but it's a lot to keep track of. You know, is Mr. Block going +5 every single frame, and then the other guy's going -5, and the X and Y. It's just a lot to keep track of. It's really nice in JavaScript. You can create the variable and just have JavaScript keep track of everything for you. Okay, so this is basically your start to animation.html if you choose to do this one. It'll be available on the CS15100 account under Final Project.